Welcome back to Rand on Real Estate. I'm Greg Rand on 77 WABC and WABCRadio.com. We're broadcasting from Midtown Manhattan, right above, Madison Square Garden, where the Knicks had a game today or something because the street was packed with crazy people. But it's beautiful weather, and it's a beautiful time to be alive, especially if you are in control of your own life and in command of your destiny. We're talking here about investing in real estate for securing your financial future. We've got somebody on the line now who's become a very good friend of mine and who commands a large international real estate company. It's Tami Bonnell, the president of U.S. operations for EXIT Realty. How you doing, Tami?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm doing great, too. Thanks for being on the show.
My pleasure.
So Tami, just to set it up here, she has got a unique kind of prism that she sees the world through, because she has an army of tens of thousands of real estate professionals on the ground, mainly in the U.S. and her sister organization in Canada. And so she gets a chance to do what I've been doing also, which is travel around a lot of places and get her finger on the pulse of real estate markets everywhere. So Tami, give me from the top level, what kind of things are you seeing this year that might be different than what's been going on the last couple of years?
Well, obviously, preaching to the choir, having a conversation with you, but certainly seeing the market get busier, seeing more investors jump in, and from every age range, which I think is
It's interesting.
Pretty terrific. The consumer is in control, and I think that they want to see, it used to be that the biggest complaint was communication, and now it is truly that they want information, they want to be part of the process. And I think that as long as you're really educated about the process, you're going to really enjoy the process. It's much more positive environment than I've seen in a really long time. That's
great to hear. I'm glad you said that being in control. That was what we were talking about in the first segment, is the idea that unlike other investments, owning real estate is really more like owning a small business. That's a better way for an investor to look at it. It's not a kind of thing where you write a check and you walk away, and a lot of people don't do it because they say, Tami, they say, I don't want to be a landlord. God forbid my tenant calls me with a leaky faucet. Oh, my God. It'd be like, it's like a leper wanting to give me a hug. I can't have that. Can't have anybody calling me. It's too much of a hassle. They want to look at real estate investing kind of like they look at when they buy a stock. They send the check in and they just wait for the returns. But it is much more of an entrepreneurial thing. And what it sounds like you're telling me is that the people that you're seeing out in the field recognize that, and they don't shy away. In fact, they revel in it. They like the idea that they're have a degree of control and influence over the outcome.
I absolutely agree with that. I think the key is knowing why you're doing the investment. Are you doing it towards retirement? Are you doing it to put your children through school? Are you doing it for steady cash flow now? And the more information you share with whoever's representing you, the better off you're going to be.
That's funny you said that, too, because you and I are on the same page on so many things, but we haven't talked about some of these issues, which is why when we talked about setting this interview up, I said, let's not talk about it too much before we go on the air. Let's do it for real so that it's spontaneous. There are more and more people, more than I even expected, that are coming into this realm with their heads on straight, more than in the past. For example, they don't have that dopey business plan, if I want to buy a foreclosure at half price. They're coming in not looking at a big quick flip, get-rich-quick strategy. They're looking at, like you said, I have young kids. I want to send them to college. I want to retire in 20 years. I want to build a nest egg, and I want to use real estate to do that. That's really gratifying, because if you go at this thing with realistic expectations, you're going to have a pretty good outcome. I can't guarantee anybody anything, but if you buy a house that's a good house in a good school district in a good place, and you rent it out to nice people and hang on to it for 20 years, I have a pretty good feeling about the outcome there, right? You're not going to lose your butt on that investment if you do it right and have the long-term expectation. So you specifically are seeing some a major uptick in activity from international investors. Is that right?
We have, we're in Canada and the United States. We see a tremendous amount of business going back and forth, and that's another thing that's really good to know, is that flow of where the business is coming from. And probably 10 states in the United States, we're getting better than 30% of our business is coming in from Canada in cash.
Wow. Wow, when I see that's meaningful to me on so many levels, and the most important of which is that sometimes on this show, this might surprise you, Tami, people get mad at me for being optimistic, right? I've gotten some hate mail, which is actually pretty cool, getting hate mail. None of my friends get hate mail. So I get some hate mail from people who are like, you're supposed to be wringing your hands, Greg. You're not supposed to be feeling good about the possibilities in the future. We're all, nobody has any jobs, Greg, and everybody's underwater on their mortgages, Greg, and what are you doing being optimistic? And to them, to be able to point to Canadians And, of course, there's investors coming out of China and out of Australia and all over the world. But the Canadian money flowing into the U.S., what it basically tells me is that they know something that a lot of us have forgotten. Or they know something that we take for granted, which is, this is America. We go through slumps, but we always recover.
Right.
We always have and always will. They recognize that as plain as the nose in their face. And sometimes people here forget it because, they live here. They're too close to the situation.
Well, I think that you can put yourself in your own bubble by not paying attention to everything that's around you. What I'm really thrilled with is that we're getting an awful lot of really young people that are getting it about investing really young. They're really looking at the whole picture. And there's so much information. I mean, obviously since you wrote the book, but that past, present, and future, understanding the market, the more I understand what's gone on in the past in that specific area, the more I know what's going on presently, the better I can predict the future. We have to be pretty good forecasters. It's important to be able to do that, but I think there's enough information for the consumer to make a very educated business decision about their future. I think that it's not just a stab in the dark. I think that actually going through the recession has made them more conservative about what it is they're going to do, and they really want to make sure they get value and a return so that they're getting all the information. Let's look at it realistically. How many houses do you really think are underwater, percentage-wise? I mean, I know it's glaring and it's in front of everybody's face all the time, but that isn't the whole population.
Yeah, in fact, there's actually the stat that I love that you never hear is that there are more people with houses paid off than there are that have negative equity. People throw around the number of people that are underwater, but they never talk about how many actually did it right, bought a house they like in a place they like, paid the thing off, and are now sitting on a paid-off asset. But you mentioned the young people. That's really encouraging. I had not heard that before. Because obviously, if you're young, that means if you're in your 20s, retirement is decades away, which means you have all the time in the world to ride cycle after cycle up and up and build your wealth. But also the fact that everybody focuses on how we have a lot of baby boomers, 70-something million baby boomers that are going into retirement age over the next decade, and how we have to take care of them and how it's a burden on the rest of society or whatever. And we only have half that many Generation X. But if you go one more generation, the Generation Y, or what's now called the Millennials, they're as big of a generation as the baby boomers, right? It's like 75 million.
That's right.
Generation Y. So you see that. I've heard you talk about that on stage. Tell me more about those guys.
Well, Warren Buffett actually just had this terrific statistic that I think is, noteworthy. There are 4 million people in the United States turning 22 every single year.
Really?
4 million turning 22, and we have more multi-generational households than we've had since the Depression. Sooner or later, they're going to want to have children. They're going to want to move on, so that creates a need, right? That
you've got a pent-up demand for housing.
Both with people purchasing and with people renting, and I think that that's just going to see the investor piece of this puzzle grow and grow. I mean, it was almost a quarter of the population, a quarter of the purchases last year, and I think that it's going to be stronger this year, don't you?
So you're saying investors were a quarter of the purchases this year?
That's right.
Right, yeah, that's one of my stats that I like talking about, is that nobody really realizes how there is a quiet revolution going on, I think is kind of the point here, okay? 1 in every 4 homes that were purchased in 2011 were bought by investors, and the majority of them, their plan was to rent it out to somebody else. And so it isn't like, you're still buying low if you buy now, but you're not alone. There's a lot of other people taking the same plunge, which is why, from an entrepreneurial perspective, if you're somebody out there that has a couple of dollars set aside, who's getting sick of getting a 1% return on your money in the bank, or maybe losing your money in the stock market, if you've been looking at residential real estate and you start to look at it like an entrepreneurial opportunity, a small business, it's really cool that way. I mean, you start researching markets, you start doing things like, you get my book, Crash Boom, go to Amazon and buy it. Not you, Tami, I know you already have it. But people listening, you go and get that. You read, it gives you ideas of how to research. You pick a place that you like, and then you start digging into that place. Like little things like going to a planning board meeting. Planning board is, made up of people in the local town who give thumbs up or thumbs down votes on whether you can build a store here, whether you can build a house there, whether you can put an awning in front of your store. They are the ones that give approval for these things. And you go to one of those meetings and you'll get a sense if they are pro-business or anti-business, pro-investor or anti-investor. Just knowing that by doing original research, your own personal research. You're not relying on anybody else. That's the whole point. You're relying on yourself. You build the wisdom yourself, and and it's an incredibly powerful thing.
I absolutely agree, and I think that when you get to do more of the homework, even on the past, present, and future, I mean, obviously your book does a wealth of that, but when you really look at, until this last nightmare, which unfortunately more people use their home as an ATM, and there wasn't that equity in it. Before that, people literally had tremendous equity in their homes, and they built it that way.
Right.
So they had a nest egg for whatever they wanted to utilize out of it, and they all had a nest egg, and they got it. That, yes, we want a return on investment, but it's a long-term investment. The great thing about being an investor, though, is that you get all those benefits short-term of all of the opportunities for tax write-offs and cash flow, and you can do all the homework up front so that you really do know exactly what you're getting into. And then long term, whether that's retirement or putting children through school or paying for a wedding or whatever it is you decide to do with the money's there, or even to invest in more property as time goes on.
Right, beautiful. All right, I have to jump off to a break now. Tammy, thank you so much for being on the show. This is Tami Bonnell. She's the president of U.S. Operations. Tammy, great to have you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Have a great day.
You too. All right, it's Rand on Real Estate on 77 WABC and WABCRadio.com. Give us a call. The rest of the show is dedicated to your calls. 800-848-WABC. That's 800-848-9222. See you after the break.